Actually don't have a direct relationship, let's say, so maybe that's up front. But we had like an indirect relationship over the time. And we had this idea of giving you an idea of how a different world, so we'll take you on a bit of a tour into the geodata world, which is kind of adjacent to architecture and construction, but there's kind of varying degrees of overlap between the two. And we will try to show you a part that might be very close to you, which is about zoning and zoning plan revisions, so slightly dry topic, but hopefully we can make it a bit interesting and give you a bit of insight into how geodata world deals with very similar topics as the BIM world, but in a very different way. And maybe a bit about us. So I'm from luucy, which is a 3D WebGIS that some of you might or might not know, based in Switzerland, so we mostly serve the Swiss market at the moment. And we have a lot of geodata in there, but we try to bridge this gap between the geo world and the CAD BIM world. And Matthias?
My name is Matthias Kuhn. I'm CTO at openGIS.ch. I am a developer by training and also geographer by training. And for the last 10 years or so, I've been busy building up a company that works like mostly all of it in open source in the GIS world. And trying to dive a bit into a topic today that is, at least in Switzerland, one of the things that are like the basis of something that we call the national geodata infrastructure, which is not like one infrastructure, but more like what everybody in Switzerland contributes in terms of geodata, how that interacts and how data is exchanged and so on. So I'll take you to a bit of, I have to excuse myself for a short conceptual, theoretical tour around things. But if you stick to that, I can assure you that Thorben will show you some amazing visualizations afterward, which will compensate for all of that. So basically, there is a technology called Interlist. Just if I may ask, who has heard the term already? Okay,
that's more than expected.
Who has actually used it already? At least, okay, that's fine. Then I think my talk might just be the right level. Cool. So the basic idea behind Interlist is that we have homogeneous data in whole Switzerland, in the geodata domain. So on the right side, you see a couple of domains where Swiss government, cantons, communities, municipalities need to collect data. Like at the bottom, there is the Nutzungsplanung, which our talk will mostly be about or focus on. And there is a page called Geodienste.ch, which is quite cool in terms of like sharing data. It's like an intercantonal platform where data is published and exchanged. So basically what they try to do is to publish data in a homogeneous format, so everybody, like we get from all over Switzerland, the same. Classically, data was obviously, you all remember, at the start of COVID, right? A couple of Excel lists or faxes being sent around, which were not so cool to calculate statistics on. So Interlist was like for 30 years already in the geo domain trying to tackle exactly this problem. So whatever happens, if big data is going to impact us soon, people were thinking 30 years ago, let's call Bruce Willis. And whatever they do, they always create some law, right? So basically, the Swiss law mandates cantons and the government to publish their requirements for data. I'll get a bit more into that in exactly this format. The requirement is that when we talk about data delivery, and I have maybe to just say some words in German right now, die Datenübergabe, not as an Übergabe in the first sense, but more like something that you pass on to someone else, and he will be very happy that it's in a great shape, whatever he's receiving from you. So that's what the basic, like clearly defined interfaces, and you're able to give something, a gift to someone which you already know yourself is in a good shape. So there is, like, whenever I say I want to start to collect data for something, geodata related stuff for the government, I have to think about what I actually want. Like, is something a number, is something a text, is something like one of a few options, like quality, like is it bad, good, very good, or is it like worse, terrible, maybe good, whatever. So like that we talk about the same semantics, right? And we write all of that down in models. And models are some texting, we all know code. So basically, that what we see here is a part of that Nutzungsplanung, which is published by the ARE, where we have Geobasisdaten in there, we have a couple of geometries, we have descriptions and whatever. So that really clearly defines, if you are going to deliver some data to me, that's the way that's to look like. And I guess that somehow resembles BIM, but that's not my expertise somehow. That's maybe you do the better connection than I do. So basically, all of that has been around for years, and like there's the requirement to deliver data in this format. But honestly, you don't want to write that yourself, because in the end, it's like a bit of XML that you need to deliver in the end. And like very often, communities, municipalities, they will give away the job to like collect and digitize the data to some engineering offices where some people in here might be working for, and that's really like you have to digitize the data, you have to draw it, you have to select the attributes, you have to properly check all that and make it ready. And you don't want to do that by hand, and it's complicated and so on. So that's where our idea was, let's build something on top of QGIS. Short other hands around QGIS. More hands, cool. So that's a nice little tool to work with. Geodata, it does a lot of nice things because you can snap and cut and whatever you want with geometries. It allows you also to digitize geometries in a way that you have all these like tools that you would also know from the typical vector editing software application. And basically that helps you to digitize the your layers, but then you still have to bring it into this interlist format, right? So that funky thing there. And that's where Model Baker comes in. What this plugin for QGIS does is it connects to the cantons or to the federal administrations, gets your model for Nutzungsplanung, for example, finds out what kind of objects you need to collect, converts them into layers, which we see here over in the layer tree, configures the attributes so that you know what kind of quality types you have to assign, and all of that it makes completely ready for you. You still have to choose a couple of things like how you want to, what's yellow and green, right? So it doesn't really know that by itself, but that's maybe even a fun thing to do actually, to work on that symbology. And then it will also, even next to preparing the layers, I've said like attributes. So for like one of these typical zonen, and maybe there are better experts than me in the domain in here, you will get that kind of attribute forms where you enter the attributes. And what was very important from the beginning on was that we will do quality checks as early as possible in the process. Because the worst thing that you can have is that you deliver some data to the canton, and 3 months later, when they finally found the time to check it, they will send it back to you and tell you you've done it all wrong, because then it's like 3 months later, you don't have any contract to work on anymore, you're anyway busy with other stuff. So ideally, you want that all directly checked for as much quality as possible in time, so you get some checks directly when you enter the data, and you get a couple of other checks optionally later on before you deliver the data, which means that you can do some very advanced checks on your data yourself before you hand it over to someone else who does the the same checks again before accepting the data. So that means we're in a great position to deliver the data to a service like Geodata.ch. They will accept it, they will be very happy to publish it, and then I think my colleague over here, Thorben, has some good ideas what he can do with it.
Yeah, so probably a couple of you has seen Geodata.ch, and it fits actually quite well with what we do. So we usually bring a couple of data sources together, like the Swiss building set, the terrain, a bunch of these data that is on Geodata. And we often get this question, can we simply visualize, for instance, a zoning plan revision? I mean, there's other use cases, and this is definitely not the core use case of luucy. The ones who know luucy know it's more about modeling and kind of making cost estimations and so on, but municipalities tend to ask us, yeah, but you have this really nice 3D environment, can we not just pre-visualize what we're doing to exactly do what Matthias was just mentioning, shortening the feedback loop, so that everyone involved can see what it's going to be when you do a zone change, if you add a story, if you increase the length, whatever. So what will it be? So that's nice and good, but what data is actually available? So as Matthias just said, most of this is published. So the cluster for sure is published. That's kind of a very ancient process. Then the Nutzungsplanung is also published, as you just showed, by the cantons and most municipalities, not all of them, depends a bit on where you work. And then the building stocks, so basically what is there already in the terrain is also published. But what usually is missing, as most of you are probably aware and have grappled with over time, and probably half of you has written some version of this in some software somewhere to deal with it, is basically the zone definition. So that's not which zone is it, but actually what are the values, what are the min-max values of the heights, and so on and so on. And probably even some of you have created solutions to try to machine learn this or do something with that. But back when we started, so that's kind of 3 or 4 years ago, we actually did the manual way. So we basically gave over the municipality a form like this where they entered all this data, and they gave us something like what Matthias was just describing, a delivery of data that we could take and turn it into the actual result that you see on the right there, which is maybe not the best graphical representation, but the idea here is to show the existing buildings and to show the possible envelope, the minimum and the maximum envelope, which is kind of one interpretation of this data. And also then to find these clashes, right? Like similar like in BIM, like conflicts, where, for instance, you cannot build something, you have to have at least a certain volume here, but the parcel allows for less, right? So there are logical conflicts in there. So you want to do a lot of these checking, and you want to do this as early as possible in the process, and you want to communicate that so people can start talking about it instead of just waiting 5 years in the process. So what is not yet implemented, so what I'm just showing here is basically how we do it usually. We work with other collaborators, service providers that does some version of this. But what we would really like to do, and maybe that's actually something for the hackathon here, is to build on top of what Matthias has just presented, which is the actual underlying data format of Interlist, to extend it, to really use it to our advantage, and basically adopt this format to introduce a couple of extra attributes and start small, like picking the simple zones, so there are complicated ones, but picking the simple zones, using the format to its full potential, and basically being able to automate a lot of the stuff that we currently do manually and in this very kind of back and forth way. So this part is not implemented, but I would call it something like a test-driven data approach, where you kind of think about the test or the how does this validate, how does it help us first, and then try to get there in the data part. So, to summarize, this may be a hard cut now, but we can go to questions very quickly. Just from our perspective, why we choose to do these, or choose these libraries. So in our case, for instance, we use Model Baker to do the reverse. So we load the data with Model Baker. You can also just give it an Interlist file and load the data into QGIS. So basically, that's what we do, and that's how we use the library. But why do we do that? Because basically from our perspective, we don't want to reinvent stuff and suffer from this not invented here, let's do it ourselves because we know how it works, right? Mentality, be able to adapt and scale, so automation is then a big part of that, as we heard in the last one. And also to avoid vendor lock-in, which is kind of goes both ways, of course, but from our perspective, in this case, Internet is an open format, so we don't want a software and rely on it and don't know what it does. Maybe, Matthias, you can add from your side why you would publish it, because obviously, wouldn't it be a great tool to sell? I don't know, but
that's a fair question. Well, basically, one of the big advantages of Model Paper is that it uses or can use QGIS under the hood. Like without QGIS, Model Paper would be worth nothing at all. So in order to be able, to be built as a plugin for QGIS, you are mandated to release it in open source. So there's like no way around it. Otherwise, I mean, we could have built it for ArcGIS, but QGIS is our core desire to actually work with. So I would like state that as it gives you the possibility to stand on the shoulder of giants. So there's like years and years of work in all of that body that we built just a tiny little brick on top that allowed us to do that. And yeah, basically not reinventing the wheel, not trying to re-implement things that have already been done and so on. There's like all that huge body of work that is already there that then you can just profit from, I'd say. And it also allows us to collaborate in a very broad sense. So, for example, we had a collaboration with Colombia in the past, where they also were looking into some system for exchanging data between provinces and the state of Colombia. And yeah, basically, suddenly some people popped up and were contributing and doing cool stuff on that project, and that's just great to see.
Yeah. And maybe you can go to questions if there is one.
Yeah.
And if there's one about this, then we can.
Exactly.
I would like to quickly pick up the question that we had before.
Right.
Matthias, if you could quickly frame like what revenue streams as a plugin developer for an open source system, and and also talk a bit about who your customers are.
Right. So in that specific instance, what happened is that there was a wish from different cantons, to get better data to be able to publish that. And they give away jobs to engineering offices, so they were thinking that it would be a good way to get data in Interlist format, where they often suffered to get good data quality, by just providing tools to make it easier to deliver good data quality. So that's when we started to work together with them on this idea, which led to these systems where we have like a couple of members, which are mostly public bodies in this instance, that make a yearly funding, so that they have some yearly subscription plan. And some of them are in a steering committee organized, and we like take over the development part. My colleague over there is doing an amazing job in that nowadays. So thank you, Dave, for all the part, for everything you do on that part.